Joining me now is Dr. Warren Farrell, chair of the Commission to create a White House Council on Boys and Men, and he's the author of The Boy Crisis: Why Our Boys Are Struggling and What We Can Do About It. Dr. Farrell, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to our talking.
I am too, because I can't quite tell where you are on the political spectrum, so I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, I guess I'm to the political left. I ran for governor of California as a Democrat, and I was a very strong supporter and fundraiser for Hillary Clinton, and was a very strong opponent of guns. So much so that I got a lot of threats when I ran for governor of California. But I also have and I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City for 3 years. So that's sort of my liberal background. But there are some things I found in researching the boy crisis that sort of took me a little bit away from the normal liberal path, and that is that I found that the boy crisis, first of all, exists in 63 of the most developed nations, and in those developed nations, there were two things that were happening. One was a huge number of divorces that were permitted in nations that didn't have to worry so much about survival. And then also in the United States, 53% of women who have children under 30, when they're under 30, have children without being married, which leads to more than half of those children having very minimal or no contact with their fathers after the age of 4. Many don't even know their fathers altogether. And what I discovered was that the boy crisis exists, or the boy crisis resides, where fathers do not reside. And so when I began to present this, thinking it would be sort of everybody cares that our boys are doing really well, I expected conservatives and liberals to be very responsive in about an equal amount. But I found that the liberal response was very cautious at best, sort of saying that we want women to have the freedom to raise children without their dads. And my background as a feminist was to say, wait a minute, I definitely want women to have freedom, but the moment you make the freedom you take advantage of the freedom to raise children, with that freedom comes a responsibility to make sure that that life is going to be optimal for the child. And if we find out that children who have minimal or no father involvement, what I call dad-deprived children, are doing absolutely terribly for the most part in more than 70 different areas. And these areas are nightmares, like being more likely to commit suicide, die from drug overdose. Our ISIS recruiters are almost all dad-deprived boys, ISIS recruits. The mass shooters I discovered in doing the research for the boy crisis are almost all dad-deprived boys. Our prisoners are not only 93% male, but almost more than 90% of the prisoners are dad-deprived. And so this all and the suicide rate is more predicted by dad deprivation than any other single phenomenon. And so, and then I also found that the dad deprivation hurts our daughters as well, but in different types of ways frequently than it does with our sons, and not as intensely as it is with our sons.
So Dr. Farrell, I can see why progressives might be a little concerned when you say in developed nations where divorce is permitted. So you're going to have to at least clarify what that means.
I'm totally in favor of divorce being permitted, but I am in favor of divorce being reduced, not by legislation, but by communication. And I teach communication courses all around the country to help men and women do what is the single biggest thing that creates a divorce, which is human beings have an inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. And that leads to both men and women feeling like they're walking on eggshells, and therefore not bringing up the real feelings that are hurting them and bothering them. And that oftentimes leads to even people who are married often feeling psychologically divorced, or what I call in minimum security prison marriages. So that's one of the real solutions. But I would be very much opposed to anyone that said divorces should not be allowed. Although I'm very much a strong supporter of the couple, of learning how to communicate, not only for adults who are couples, but also I think that communication process should start in the first and second grade, as it does to very good benefit in Denmark, for example.
So Dr. Farrell, look, I'm an enormous believer in communication overall. I'm a talk show host. And I'm a huge believer in communication within marriages. I totally agree with you that that's the number one factor for how to get along better. Understand each other's perspectives
Yes.
because we're not taught to do that overall. But having read some of your stuff and the way that you're framing the argument, sometimes it feels like you're saying that the onus is on women to keep the men in the marriage. And if not that, at least 50-50, when it feels like most of the time it's the men who are choosing to leave. Shouldn't the far greater onus be on the men who are not in the marriage, and not only not in the marriage, but not taking care of the kids outside of the marriage?
Well, first of all, any father that leaves the marriage and doesn't understand his importance to children really needs to understand that he's of enormous value. I feel that neither men nor women, you can't pick up a book on parenting for the most part and find out what the difference is between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting and understand why both are so important. So, for example, moms and dads, obviously this will be reversed in some marriages and some relationships, but moms and dads tend to have very different styles. So both will tend, for example, to set boundaries in exactly the same way. They'll say, sweetie, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas. And dads will, and then children will test the boundaries in the same way. They'll say, Mom, I had a few peas. Can I have my ice cream now? And moms will oftentimes go, well, I'm not going to get into a big fight over a few peas. I'll tell you what, honey, have a few more peas, and then you can have your ice cream. Whereas dads will tend to a much greater degree to say, sorry, we have a deal here. The deal here is you can't have ice cream until you finish your peas. And so what children tend to learn with moms to a greater degree is that they can manipulate a better deal. And with dads, they tend to learn that they don't have any option but to focus their attention on doing what they need to do, finishing the peas, in order to get what they want to do. And that greater tendency to boundary enforcement is not always a good thing, but it has to be in checks and balance mode with the mom's tendency to sort of be empathetic and to nurture. Now, these are general patterns, and sometimes they're reversed. But what we find in home after home, where there isn't a significant amount of father involvement, that the children, both boys and girls, are much less likely to have the lack of boundary enforcement tends to lead to a lack of postponed gratification, which leads to both the boys and girls doing worse in homework or other activities like, say, playing baseball or soccer or whatever, where they have to have the discipline to repeat the routines over and over again to be the best in that sport.
Right.
And so the boys then end up tending to withdraw, become ashamed of themselves. They're not getting any accolades from the teachers, and when it comes to boy-girl time, as a rule, girls tend to date winners, and winners means performers. They don't tend to date what they think of as losers. And so the boys who haven't achieved, don't have that postponed gratification, their shame often leads them to withdrawing into video game addiction or into porn, where they can have access to a variety of attractive women without being afraid of rejection at a price that they can afford. And that of course is a major problem of addicting the brain to dopamine for increasingly risky activities that make the girls who finally do get involved with them really feel like they're objectified, and that leads the girls to withdraw, reinforce the belief that the boys can't find a girl without being rejected and back into porn again.
Right. So, well, okay, Dr. Farrell, I understand that you studied it and you did caveat it twice, but it does seem like there's a very healthy dose of generalization and a little bit of stereotypes in there. So I can't question it too much because I don't have the science of how, the statistics behind the generalizations that you're talking about. But I do want to move on to another part of this, because I think, look, you say you agree that we can't obviously force people to stay in marriages. Super obvious. We can't force them to get married in the first place. That's not what free society does. And I believe that marriages are disintegrating because it's not exactly in human nature. We're not monogamous by nature. So to me, the more interesting question is, how do we get both parents to participate more in raising the children when they're not in marriage, instead of trying to keep marriage together in a way that seems unsustainable no matter how hard we try?
Yes. Well, first of all, I think that the communication issue does help make marriages sustainable, or at least living together or being very close to each other. However, if there's a divorce, I did discover when I did the research for the boy crisis that there's 4 things that lead to children doing almost as well as they do in an intact family. One is that the mothers and fathers are about equally involved time-wise with the children. Number 2 is that the father and mother don't live more than about 20 minutes drive time from each other, so that the children don't have to resent being at the other parent's home because they're giving up activities or giving up friends' birthday parties or whatever. Number 3 is that there's no bad mouthing or bad body language that the child can detect by mom toward dad or by dad toward mom. And number 4, there's really good evidence that ongoing communication counseling from the parents, relationship counseling being participated by the parents is extremely important. That's to be distinguished from emergency counseling, because during emergency counseling, parents tend to have that under the emergency pressure. They tend to sort of take very serious different sides, and they don't hear what the positive intent of the other parent is and what the positive strategies of the other parent is. So those are what I call the 4 must-dos after divorce. And in any family, what is really a must-do is family dinner nights. And family dinner nights often evolve in many families into family dinner nightmares. And because the families oftentimes do not know how to set family dinner nights up in a way that gets rid of all the electronics, that gets everybody speaking, everybody listening before the next person speaks, everybody having a limited amount of time to speak, and doing a number of things that make family dinner nights produce the outcome of everyone feeling that at the family dinner table, it's a safe space to present any feeling that you want, knowing that you're not going to be interrupted, but that on the other hand, you have a limited time, so you can't dominate the family conversation.
Okay. All right. Well, that's at least some suggestions that are interesting and hopefully productive. So, Dr. Warren Farrell, thank you for joining us. Everybody, the book is called The Boy Crisis. Thank you. The TYT Plus app is now available on iOS and Android. Download to get more TYT content at tyt.com/app.